The story begins with a jolt so sudden it forces anyone following the Madlaga hearings to stop and rethink everything. A key witness, someone whose voice was supposed to reshape the direction of the inquiry, was taken out right in front of family members. It wasn't supposed to be possible, not with the level of tension surrounding the case and the supposed layers of protection meant to safeguard high-value testimonies. But it happened, and the shockwave didn't just rattle investigators. It unsettled an entire community watching closely and wondering who, or what, could have the power to orchestrate a hit so brazen. From this point on, the deeper you go, the more the lines blur between coincidence, conspiracy, desperation, and design. Because tonight, you will step into the identity of this witness, into the weight of what they carried, into the cracks in the security meant to shield them, into the suspicious timeline that led to the moment everything collapsed, and into the unanswered questions that now dominate every corridor of the investigation. What was supposed to be a straightforward testimony now transforms into a maze filled with shadows, misdirection, and an unexpected twist that challenges everything the public thought they understood about the Madlaga saga. Before we break into the layers of this unraveling mystery, here's a question worth pausing on. When a death happens this publicly, this confidently, and with this much precision, does it suggest a hit by professionals or a catastrophic failure in the system built to keep threats at bay? Whatever your instinct is, it says something about how fragile truth becomes when it stands too close to dangerous power. The witness at the center of this story wasn't always seen as someone whose absence would shake institutions. They started as an ordinary participant in community life, not the type of person who stands out, not the type who becomes a threat to anyone with influence. But certain stories only become dangerous when the details behind them come to light. And this witness had details, real, verifiable, uncomfortable details, about movements, meetings, and conversations that authorities could no longer ignore once they surfaced. What made them dangerous wasn't their personality. It was their proximity to truths nobody wanted publicly attached to the Madlaga hearings. When you trace back the early days of the investigation, you notice something unusual. The witness's identity was handled with an air of quiet urgency. There was no grand protection protocol, no relocation, no heavily guarded perimeter like in high-profile cases. Instead, there was an almost casual treatment of someone who clearly represented a threat to unknown parties. And this subtle disregard would later stand out as one of the earliest indicators that things weren't being managed with the seriousness the situation required. Even the way information leaked hinted at a system struggling to keep its own walls from cracking. On the day leading up to the attack, everything seemed painfully normal. The witness went about their routine, spoke with neighbors, shared a meal with family, and seemed unaware of the invisible countdown ticking around them. But when investigators later retraced the timeline, they found small windows, moments so ordinary they were nearly dismissed, that could have provided perfect opportunities for surveillance, tracking, or even warnings. The tragedy wasn't just in what happened. It was in how quietly all the signs hid in plain sight. For many following the case, the shock of the event triggered memories of other high-stakes public failures where the system meant to protect people seemed to unravel at the worst possible moment. The kind of situation where everyone assumes that someone else is handling it, someone else is monitoring the risks, someone else is responsible for ensuring the right people are safe. And then, suddenly, the illusion collapses, revealing just how thin the barrier between safety and disaster can be. The question that dominated the early hours after the assassination was direct and unsettling. Who benefits the most when a witness like this disappears? It's a question investigators always ask, one that usually invites a range of possibilities, from rival groups to insiders to individuals with personal grudges. But in this case, the answers weren't lining up cleanly. The witness's testimony didn't point to just one figure. It pointed to multiple threads, multiple layers, multiple possible motivations. That complexity made the investigation both urgent and dangerously unpredictable. It didn't help that early police statements seemed out of sync with reports from people who were actually present. Some officials claimed officers arrived within minutes. Residents insisted it took longer. Some statements suggested the area had been under patrol. The families nearby said they hadn't seen officers for hours. These contradictions created confusion and cast shadows on the credibility of the initial response. It wasn't long before observers whispered about whether miscommunication was the only issue at play or if something deeper was being buried. To understand the magnitude of the incident, You need to imagine the scene immediately afterward, not in graphic detail, but through the sudden shift in atmosphere. One moment it was a normal family setting. The next it was panic, screaming, disbelief, and a scramble for answers no one had. The moments after such an event are often filled with chaos, but this one carried a kind of eerie clarity too. The sense that whoever executed the attack had done so cleanly, confidently, and with an exit strategy already prepared long before the shot was fired. And as the family processed the unimaginable, some community members recalled times when people tried to warn authorities about the risks certain witnesses faced. Stories surfaced about previous cases where vulnerable individuals asked for help but received delayed or inadequate support. These recollections weren't raised to shift blame, but to emphasize a pattern, one where systems intended to protect truth-tellers sometimes fail at the worst possible time. At this point in the story, the narrative hits the midpoint, the moment where viewers usually reflect on what they've seen and ask themselves, is justice still possible when those holding the truth are silenced? It's the moment where engagement surges, where conversations erupt, where people begin to question whether public institutions are strong enough to handle the weight of the shadows they are meant to uncover. Moving deeper into the second half, the biggest question reemerges with sharper focus. What was the witness preparing to reveal that made them such a threat? Investigators recovered fragments of conversations, incomplete notes, and second-hand reports, suggesting that the testimony would have connected dots that, until now, were floating separately. These connections weren't about one person. They were about networks, systems, and patterns of influence that extended further than anyone initially assumed. The presence of the family during the attack complicated the emotional and political weight of the event. Not only did it raise concerns about the witnesses' safety protocol, but it also ignited discussions about trauma, fear, and trust in legal processes. Families shouldn't have to carry the burden of witnessing a moment so destructive, especially when the individual involved was meant to be under some form of protection. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline with painstaking precision. They analyzed phone records, vehicle movements, security lapses, and even the witnesses' own behaviors in the hours leading up to the attack. Every detail mattered, every conversation, every pause, every unfamiliar face. What emerged was a timeline that didn't just outline the final moments. It revealed inconsistencies in the days prior, suggesting the witness might have been unknowingly monitored. There was also a moment when a retired investigator shared a personal story that resonated deeply with those following the case. He recalled a time when a single overlooked detail, something seemingly insignificant, ended up exposing the truth behind a much larger conspiracy. It was a reminder that sometimes the answers hide not in dramatic evidence, but in quiet, easily dismissed fragments of information. As the analysis continued, experts stepped forward with critiques about the broader system. They spoke about the importance of safeguarding crucial testimony, not just through escorts and relocation, but through deeper structural reforms that ensure information isn't held by a single vulnerable individual. Their emphasis wasn't on blame, but on recognizing the cost of neglect in high-stakes investigations. As new theories emerged, one question gained traction. Could internal sabotage have played a role? The idea wasn't far-fetched, considering how often leaks, miscommunications, and unexplained delays had been documented in related inquiries. If someone inside had compromised the witness's safety, it would explain the precision of the timing and the clarity of the execution. More evidence surfaced, subtle, often overlooked signs suggesting someone might have been monitoring the witness for days, perhaps weeks. Small inconsistencies in phone activity, unusual patterns in nearby vehicles, and reports of unfamiliar individuals lingering in the area painted a picture of an operation far more coordinated than officials initially acknowledged. When investigators finally pieced together the major turning point, it wasn't a single revelation but a shift in understanding. The attack, they realized, wasn't merely an isolated act. It was part of a broader strategy to silence a narrative before it entered the public domain. It showed a level of organization that forced the entire inquiry to expand its scope. In closing, a final story circulated, one shared by someone who had once lived under witness protection. They described how vulnerability doesn't disappear just because you're told you're safe, and how truth-tellers often carry burdens they never asked for. The story served as a quiet thread connecting the present tragedy to countless unseen struggles across the justice system. By the time the narrative reaches its finishing point, the picture is clear. This wasn't just the loss of a witness. It was a collision between truth and forces determined to bury it. It was a reminder of how fragile justice becomes when those who hold pieces of the truth are left exposed. And it leaves us with an unsettling but honest reflection, one that lingers long after the story ends.